Today on Escape the Clock, we're aiming to answer the following question. As the threats to our financial security get smarter and faster, how do we keep the wealth that we're working so hard to build? Consider this. In 2024, investment fraud became the most financially damaging category of cybercrime, accounting for over $6.5 billion in reported losses. That comes from the FBI Internet Crime Report. And that's not just the cost of bad luck. That's the cost of an industry of bad actors who are just getting more sophisticated. They're getting faster and better, and it's getting harder to defend against them. And they're no longer just guessing at our passwords. They're using 3-second clips of our voices and deepfakes of our faces to trick us to give access to our bank accounts, our businesses, and families into handing over the keys to our vaults. To answer this question, I'll be joined by someone who has spent decades studying exactly this problem. You'll be hearing my conversation with Robert Siciliano. He's a private investigator, a best-selling author, and the CEO of Protect Now. Robert is the architect of the Strategic Human Firewall. It's a behavioral protocol that he's designed to defend our wealth against the kind of digital attacks that honestly most of us never see coming until it's too late. So today, we're going to get into the specific behaviors and protocols that will help us protect that wealth. From basic mistakes that 90% of people are still making, to the new AI-driven scams that get past even the most paranoid among us, including myself. I learned a lot from this conversation, and if you stay tuned to the end of it, I'll admit to a mistake I recently made since my conversation with Robert, falling for one of these pretty sophisticated scams myself. And I'll share all about that at the end if you're willing to hang out. So stay tuned for my conversation with Robert Siciliano. Learn how to harden your defenses, build your strategic human firewall, and protect the wealth that you're working so hard to live off of. Welcome back to Escape the Clock, the show where we highlight strategies and approaches for achieving financial freedom and having the option not to work. I'm your host, Daniel C. Rogers. There are some well-understood strategies for the offense of financial independence. Increase your savings rates, optimize tax strategy, beat inflation, compound your way to your goal, etc. Accumulation can be enjoyable, especially when you know the strategies and you see them working. But as you are successful with the accumulation, you become a more attractive target to those that are looking to take instead of earn. There's a defense side to the equation that, when ignored, comes at great risk. According to a 2024 FBI Internet Crime Report, identity theft complaints rose by nearly 10%, with a record number of cases involving the hijacking of existing accounts. But the most alarming shift isn't in the volume of attacks, it's in the sophistication. The tools being used against us are evolving faster than our traditional security habits can keep up. The days of don't click on a clearly suspicious link have passed, and its place is an era of biological hacking and deepfakes. Even the most careful can fall prey to these new traps. We're hardwired by millions of years of evolution to trust our eyes and our ears. So when we hear a family member's voice on the phone or see a business partner's face on a Zoom call, our biological instinct is to trust. And the hackers understand that. It's become scarily easy to use a 3-second audio clip to clone voices and deepfake technology to create digital mashups that can even trick the most skeptical high earner into authorizing a catastrophic wire transfer. The truth is, if you think you're too smart to be scammed, then you're operating with a human blind spot that can be a multi-million-dollar wealth leak. And that's a risk that needs to be mitigated in the plan. Our guest today is here to help explain how dangerous things have become and how you can harden up your defenses against the digital onslaught to our portfolios. Robert Siciliano is a private investigator, a best-selling author, and the CEO of Protect Now. He has appeared on CNN, Fox News, and The Today Show as one of the nation's most trusted voices on cybercrime and personal protection. He's the architect of the Strategic Human Firewall, a methodology that moves beyond software to focus on moral governance, trusting your natural instincts, and to your strongest defense. Robert, welcome to Escape the Clock.
Thank you, Daniel. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. You spent decades in the trenches here with cybersecurity, and I know you've seen a lot of this transition I was talking about from like simple phishing emails to some of the AI-driven stuff that's happening. When did you become clear that the greatest threat to our financial security isn't some technical glitch in our bank account, but the human side of things?
Actually, I became clear on this 20 years ago. It's it's this has been a long time coming, but the reality of it is we are no more secure today as consumers than we were 20, even 30 years ago. And the reason is we talked about that human blind spot. Consumers, just everyday people, we don't want to think or believe that these things can happen to us. Like most of us to a certain degree, and it's kind of sad to say, we function in a level of denial that it can't happen to me. And that's our default. And when I get in front of a live audience, and I do that quite often, I ask basic questions like, how many of you can honestly say that you're using a different passcode across all your critical accounts? Different passcode across each account. If I get 10% of the room to raise their hand and go, yeah, I'm using a different passcode across each account, that's a lot, which means that like 90% are using the same passcode everywhere. And most people don't know this, but there's been like 15 billion passcodes on the dark web in the past, 10, 15 years. 15 billion, which means most of our passcodes are in fact on the dark web. So if one account has been compromised, that means all your accounts are compromised due to the fact that your passwords are out there and we're engaging in very poor password hygiene. So that's been going on forever. And we just don't engage in basic 101 security as we should. And the bad actors, they recognize that and they're organized and they're making a ton of money because we're just not engaged in the 101 stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was uh, fraud and cryptocurrency and brokerage accounts had a reported loss of over $5.8 billion in 2024. Like it just crazy high amount of fraud there. So let's start with some basics for a moment. For someone who, let's say they are accumulating well, they might be becoming a bigger target every day and they're starting to worry about this, or they're just curious what they should be looking for in their plan. What's some basic failure points that people might start to look for?
Well, for one, we mentioned password management, like that's just the first thing. Utilizing a password manager itself, which is a tool you download for free, and then it might be free going forward or a small monthly or annual fee for anywhere from 20 to 60, 80 bucks. I spend, I think, $17 a year on mine, my password manager that I've had now for what, 22 years. And then once your passwords are in order, never using the same passcode twice, long, strong, uppercase, lowercase, that the password manager itself generates. And then from there, it's two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication for all your critical accounts, especially email. If you just do a quick search for two-factor AOL, two-factor PayPal, two-factor eBay, two-factor Amazon, you'll see the exact instructions on how to set up two-factor authentication for all your critical accounts. And before you know it, like really, you are in the top 10% of those in America that are secure. Because when I say that like 90% of us are not using two factor and using the same passcodes everywhere, yeah. So the top 10% of secure consumers are the ones that are doing the basic things.
Yeah, I imagine the idea here is make yourself a more and more difficult target because I imagine a lot of these hackers are automating things across a high volume of potential victims. So they're trying to like maybe start with who has the obvious, easy, predictable passwords and who use it everywhere. And I know two-factor auth is huge. That makes a lot of sense. Pretty much everyone could do that now, right? Everyone has another device they can use to authenticate themselves in a better way. What about things like hardware keys, physical security tokens, Face ID? Like I imagine there's lots of layers you could put in place. How important is it? How far should people be going here?
Hardware keys eliminate vulnerability is what they do. Predators use, what we call high precision impersonation to trick you, right? Your human blind spot into handing over a password or a texted code through like what they call man in the middle attacks. But a physical token acts as a literal vault door key. It requires a physical possession and a physical tap to authorize access. So there's some manual labor involved. It's like really easy, actually. If a scammer perfectly execute what we call manufactured urgency and steals your login credentials, they phish you or they get it off the dark web, whatever the case is, they're permanently locked out because they don't have a physical key in their hand, your key. It enforces unhackable physical verification at the hardware level. I always recommend physical keys in that regard.
Are there certain platforms or accounts or services that people should be aware of are less secure than others? Or is that kind of moot if you're doing some of these other things?
It's moot. At this point, most companies that engage in some type of commerce, they provide multi-factor authentication, the ability to use an external physical token. And so they all know that they need to be as secure as necessary for the consumers. The consumers are generally the path of least resistance. It's those in the chair in front of the computer that are the vulnerability.
Gotcha. Can you talk a minute about SIM swapping? I'm curious for people who are using their mobile apps to manage their bank accounts. Is that effective in your mind, or is there a risk with that?
SIM swapping is a problem, especially for high net worth individuals. And SIM swapping essentially is when your phone is targeted, your SIM is actually targeted, and that often begins with compromising the victim's email. So their email might already be compromised. Your username being your email address, your passcode being whatever it might already be exposed on the internet, and or that high net worth individual gets phished. And then from there, once they're inside their email, the next thing is to reset the passcode for, or even access their mobile phone account online. And then from there, once they're inside the mobile phone account, then they can easily have the SIM ported to a different device. So either an eSIM or an actual physical card ported to a different device, and then the criminal has access to the two-factor authentication. That's a huge problem.
Wow.
So number one, making sure that your email is properly protected, different passcode than any other account, that your mobile phone account itself has two-factor authentication, and then even considering a different username for, say, your crypto account and or your bank account than you use for regular email. So your most valued financial accounts you want to consider as standing separately in regards to the username and of course the passcode than, say, your Facebook account or your Amazon account for that matter. Your most moneyed accounts should be separate and stand alone from anything else.
Got it. Got it. Wow. Consumers reported losing more than $2.9 billion to imposter scams in 2024 due to things like voice cloning. So, these attacks are getting more sophisticated. I know you said, like, there's some basic things, and that was really helpful. Like, people should be doing some basic things here for sure to protect themselves. But, we are moving into an era of these like perfect lies where AI can clone a family member's voice or a business partner's face. So, how do we think about building defenses against fraud that sounds and looks exactly like the people that we trust?
Yeah, predators only need 3 seconds of audio to clone your loved one's voice from a social media clip to achieve that high precision impersonation we talked about. They feed it into AI generators and create a perfect digital clone. It's perfect. You and I can't tell the difference. Our brain does not understand a digital clone. It's just perfect. They call you unexpectedly, weaponizing that manufactured urgency, like your loved one is in distress, claiming a car accident or an arrest or a kidnapping for that matter. And hearing that loved one's voice over the phone instantly triggers our emotions. And your emotions, of course, bypass any logic and it defaults to, okay, what do I got to do to get my loved one out of this situation? Manipulating you into sending funds even before you have any idea what just happened to you. So right now, having a conversation with your loved ones that this is a real thing, this is happening, people are being victimized by it. The likelihood of your loved one, say, ending up in this like tragic car accident or being kidnapped is, relatively rare compared to somebody at this point calling you, posing as your daughter or having your daughter screaming in the background is becoming more common. So having some type of a family code word, some type of a phrase, where did we vacation on your birthday? What's your favorite food? What's your mother's middle name? Like basic stuff, even though like mother's maiden name is common, like having some type of a phrase that or keyword that person has to answer, they're probably just going to hang up.
Yeah, that's really smart. So, how do people start to train their human firewall here? Because there's some biological senses that are telling us that, oh, we need to react to this urgency, right? Like, I get it. Like, if my daughter were to call and panicked, I'm just going to go into firefighting fix it mode. But the code word makes sense. But are there other red flags we should be looking for? And is there other things we need to do to calm and stop ourselves in the moment so we don't just react and make a mistake?
Yeah. So to train your strategic human firewall, basically when you are experiencing this urgency, this manufactured urgency, you got to pause. You got to recognize risk. You must replace biological panic with engineered muscle memory. That means like really thinking it through. So when scammers use that urgency, your brain just floods with adrenaline, and it triggers that emotional response. Your biological instinct to act as fast as possible to help that loved one. And you defeat this by understanding and learning what we call the AAA protocol, right? It's analyze what's happening to me right now. What's going on? What really is this? Authenticate, like, is what is happening, real or fake? And then act, and that means like getting in touch with whoever until it becomes reflex. Train yourself, train your family that urgency itself is the primary indicator that this is a threat that's probably fake. The moment that you feel rushed, that anxiety must automatically trigger like a hard pause to execute that mandatory out of band verification. Call that person. That's the acting part. Call that person, email that person, like text that person, whoever it might be, a loved one, grandchild, daughter, sibling, whatever the case is. Like, don't just get all emotional and react and start wiring money.
Right. Yeah, and I know this goes broader than that too, because many of us are building personal brands or we're investing in our social media presence, and scams initiated on social media platforms hit a record $1.9 billion in losses. Again in 2024. So I know there is this kind of risk with visibility and a trade-off of security for a lot of us. So how do we minimize the risk there while still remaining active on all these platforms?
Yeah. So, you know, high earners, let's say, they unwittingly arm scammers by oversharing everything. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, I put nothing of that online personally. I just don't. I never have, and I never will. There's no need to do that. Predators, they scrape off of all of your various platforms, whatever your memberships are, any philanthropic affiliations, any family tags, relationships you might have. In real time, they'll grab all your travel updates, where you are, where you aren't, a conference you might speaking at, and so forth. And all of this fuels that high precision impersonation. When hackers know, like, for example, an executive's on a flight and unreachable, then they'll target their assistant, say, with that manufactured urgency, or have them buy a gift card for them or for their clients or whatever, requesting a rapid wire transfer, whatever the case might be. Because the context aligns perfectly with reality, it exploits that is, executives out of town, going after that assistant, it triggers their blind spot, let's say, bypassing logic to be helpful, right? And really, it's up to us to pay attention to how can what I am sharing and putting out there be used against me or my family or my business.
Yeah, I know personally, I never would share anything publicly. I never no photos of my kids. I never wanted to put any private information out there. I was always freezing all my credit reports. I was a little paranoid, maybe. But at this point, I'm trying to put myself out there in a different way with a brand and to help do free financial education here. And I've never felt more exposed as I've been doing that, but I've been trying to be smart about it and protect. So, people who are trying to do the best practices here, how do you separate your public persona from some private brand or financial infrastructure? Are there common things you should be doing, or is it really just going to be a risk you have to take?
Well, there is certainly risk there, but I don't necessarily think we should just throw our hands up in the air and give up and do nothing. I do quite a bit actually to continually monitor my exposure. Although, I'm out there. There's, hundreds of hours of video and audio, I'm out there. But I do what's necessary to kind of scrub my personal life off the net relatively frequently. Start by searching your name, your phone number, your address, right? Do it like in an incognito browser and see what shows up, right? Predators use this open source intelligence to craft these various, forms of high precision impersonation. Search all the various data broker sites, in the real estate property type sites out there and see what shows up. Review your social media from a public perspective. And so by identifying all the different data points that are out there about you, you can begin to scrub it before it's weaponized against you. So what I probably do quarterly is I'll search my name and my address and my phone number and see what shows up with me and my actual cellular phone number. And then the same thing with my wife. And because I share a name with my dad, I do his too. And then the various data brokers, they provide you the ability to actually remove your information from public view and from their sites, where it says like do not sell or another tool that they might offer. You can actually remove it. And what I generally do is I'll reach out, I'll say remove it, and then I'll take that same link where my information shows up, I'll copy paste it, email it to myself, and I'll check it 2 weeks later, like snooze it, check it 2 weeks later, that email, see if they actually removed it. And if they did, great. And then what I'll do is snooze that same link again for like 6 months to see if it went back again, you know?
Oh, super smart.
And yeah, that way, like if it repropagated, I have it removed again. So I do that at least, quarterly to every 6 months and then annually. And I am doing a pretty good job of it. Like right now, I might have one to two places occasionally that pop up with my mobile phone number and my physical address. Keeping in mind, like I'm not sharing anything with my daughters or my wife in regards to like I'm not connected to them on social media, my dad, none of that stuff. Like as much of it we can keep out off the web, the better.
Wow. Yeah, that's really great. Great advice. For me, I've been more focused on preventative types of things. So, for instance, I'm looking to buy my wife a car for her birthday right now. It's a big milestone birthday, and I was looking at getting the car from some dealership website and going through, and they're asking me all this personal privacy information just to get the car ordered. And at the end, there's all these forced opt-ins. And I just copy and pasted and threw it through AI. I'm like, what is this really saying it's going to do? And it's like they're going to take that information, they're going to keep that information, they're going to sell that information. I said, nope, I'm not going to go. I guess I'll just drive to a dealership and deal with this, because I didn't want to do that. I didn't know how I would scrub that kind of thing. If I could scrub that kind of thing after it would go out there, it didn't seem worth the cost. So yeah, awesome advice. Love that. I would love to ask you about the psychology pieces here, though, because you can hear all this great advice, but acting on it's different. Because I think a lot of people might hear this, go, yeah, that makes sense. But there is a gap between how people feel about this and actually implementing some of the defense systems that you're recommending here. Can you go a little bit into the why this won't happen to me myth and how that's actually self-sabotaging people and what to do about it?
Yeah. So, you said something that I think I just want to point out real quick that like when you were looking for that car, you had done a quick search and asked like, how might this information be used against me? We call that a thinking person. You're thinking this thing through, like you're well thought out in that regard. Like, what are the repercussions of this? And I don't know that most people do that. I don't know that most people like take the time. We just kind of like bang through life. We're busy, we're overwhelmed. But like you thought about that and you recognize that there might be potential repercussions there. And if we do that on a regular basis and using the various tools that are at our disposal, then we're essentially like, outsmarting the sales and the marketing, the menu, and those that are out there, taking advantage of us. And in that same realm, we're also outsmarting the bad guys, those with actual bad intentions, right? Like thinking these things through. The fact of the matter is, these things do happen to us, right? And that it won't happen to me myth is the ultimate expression of what I call the human blind spot, like that want and need to trust others, right? It is frankly an arrogant belief that your wealth or your status makes you immune to scammers, whether you have a lot of money or a little bit of money for that matter. This cognitive dissonance, causes, certain people to dismiss basic security like multi-factor authentication or, managing passwords and such, right? And we wouldn't even think to engage in that AAA protocol that I talked about, analyze, authenticate, act, right? Because it's inconvenient, right? And consequently, we become easier targets because we do nothing to protect ourselves. Why would they target me is so unbelievably childish, bordering on arrogant. Okay. Cyber predators rely on this exact overconfidence or denial, right? They bypass technical firewalls using that manufactured urgency that I've mentioned multiple times, impersonating a loved one or a government agency or law enforcement, whatever. And they exploit us. So if you're thinking things through, if you're recognizing risk, if you know that these things can and do happen, but you don't worry about it. You don't worry about these things. We equate in our culture, we equate fear and worry and paranoia with security, as if engaging in security practices means that you worry and you're fearful. Like when I get in front of a live audience, I ask the question, how many of you have a home security system? And I asked this for a reason, and I'll explain real quick. How many of you have a home security system? If I get 10 to 15% of the room to raise their hand, that's a lot, right? Keeping in mind that like every year, between 1 million and 1.5 million or even 2 million homes are burglarized, right? So in the next like 10 years, that's like between 10 and 20 million homes burglarized in the next decade. But when I asked the question, okay, so why don't you have a home security system? The most common answer is, I don't have a home security system because I don't want to live like that. This is what they say. This is what they say. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to have to worry. I don't want to be paranoid. As if having a home security system is a constant reminder that people break into houses. So I don't want to have to think about that. Therefore, I'm not going to do anything about it. So I don't have to live in fear. Like, think about the ridiculousness of that. And
It's
that's
like yeah, I don't want to be one of those people that have been seen as having to have one of these things. Like there's like a status thing there, I imagine as well.
it's just childish is what it boils down to. It's somebody who is thinking as a child. I don't want to have to worry, live in fear. I want to put the covers over my head and do nothing. Like that's just silly. But that's how many of us are. And I'm not pointing fingers or anything. This is what I see over and over and over again. And which is why there are billions and billions and billions of dollars lost every single year. And people wonder, how did that happen to me? Why did they target me? Well, it's because we did nothing to protect ourselves to begin with.
Yeah, I imagine as people are hearing this, they may hear their logic here. They might go, okay, I need to wake up from this. But it does get harder, I think, as people get older to break habits they have. And like you said, people get really busy. Are there things though that we can start to teach our children before this becomes a more difficult problem? I know kids are more technology savvy than ever before. I see that with my kids, but at the same time, they put themselves out there way more than I'm comfortable with. And I wish they would protect themselves a little better. So, how do we actually start to get a handle on this with our own kids?
Well, as a dad, I'm a girl dad, and I've been talking to my girls about like personal protection since they were young. If they're going to be going over like, a friend's house and spending the night, at the age of like 5 and 6 years old, I'm talking about good touches and bad touches. Okay. I'm talking like serious, like personal security at a young age. Why? Because it's something that they need to know. Because there are people out there that have no problem with, touching a child, right? So when you start to have conversations with loved ones about personal protection first, violence and theft prevention, right? Personal protection at a young age, at any age for that matter, you make security personal. And then from there, what's more personal than protecting your identity, right? Your social security number, managing your passwords, again, two-factor authentication, like all this stuff is personal to us. On the hierarchy of human needs, at the base of that triangle is like physiological needs, getting a good night's rest, consuming foods and fluids. Right above that is safety, security, stability, structure, and protection. And these are conversations that we don't generally have with our loved ones at all because we don't want to think these things can happen to us. And so my daughter's going off to college. She's already learned self-defense. She's already learned how to physically debilitate and physically hurt somebody really bad if necessary. And so we've had multiple conversations about the fact that going off to college and ending up in a fraternity, at a party, that there's a 1 out of 4 chance that because 1 out of 4 young women are sexually assaulted at school, that these are uncomfortable conversations that we don't have with our loved ones that we should. And once you have these conversations, then consuming information about managing risk financially, updating your hardware, updating your software, protecting your identity, recognizing what to do when the phone rings, when you get a text message, when an email comes in. Like all of this stuff becomes more and more natural when you begin to make all security personal.
The average American, there was a Empower study this year that said the average American now manages 168 passwords, and that's a 70% increase since 2021. And I think like you said, not everyone's doing this, but there are people that are doing this are finding because there's so many places that ask for a password now. You end up creating tons and tons and tons and tons of them.
Yep.
And this can be, in particular, a bottleneck for families when they're thinking about things like an estate transfer, for instance. And there's a fear that happens of locking out our families or of their legacy because digital security was actually too tight and it didn't get passed on properly. So people don't have access to the wealth that we work so hard to build. Is there a risk of being too successful with the security here and actually creating it making it backfire?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Our, planning for our digital estate should be right alongside, planning for our demise. I mean, that's just look at my wife, my girls, they have full blown access to my afterlife, my digital life, right? They have access to the password manager. And I've told them point blank, when I perish, because it's going to happen anytime now. Look at, I'm only 57, but when I say it's going to happen anytime now, that's legit. It could happen anytime now, you
That's
know?
true when you're younger.
Y-
It's true for
Yeah, I
everyone.
mean, it can happen anytime now. You could walk outside, not paying attention, go in a crosswalk and looking at your phone, and the driver's not paying attention either, and both of you, are at fault. You know what I'm saying? And so stuff happens, heart attack, whatever. Okay, and so by having full blown access to my password manager, I also said to them, if and when it happens, you also got to pay for my mobile phone plan for the next couple of years because that's attached to two-factor authentication. So not only are you going to need the username and the passcode to get in via the password manager, you're going to need my phone as that second factor. So digital assets like your investments and cryptocurrency and the private keys and all that stuff, it matters. Traditional assets, have a legal paper trail. Your wealth in general might require that second factor, private keys. If you die, become incapacitated without securely transferring the, exact alphanumerical string, whatever it might be, your wealth can die with you. Your family can't simply call blockchain and say, "Hey, how do I get in?" So having that discussion now and having some form of strategy, like a multi SIG protocol, whatever that might be, and you could determine what that is by doing your own searches and determining a strategy that one daughter has this, another daughter has that, your wife has this, some type of a protocol where it takes more than one key to get access to it all makes a lot of sense. And that's something that those who have built wealth should be thinking of right now.
Do you think like high owners should be bringing on a digital executor on top of a traditional one? Is that something that you would recommend?
So that's certainly an option, and that might be your attorney. It might be a third party altogether. And as we get a little bit deeper into the weeds, and like you did earlier, doing a quick search on how does entering my information cause negative repercussions, and what might they do with it. As you investigate these various tools that are available to you, where they should be stored, and who has access to them, and what that multi-sig protocol looks like, whatever third parties are out there that you can also engage in, will become apparent to you.
Got it. Well, Robert, this has been honestly a very amazing and insightful conversation. I have a couple takeaways I'm going to do actually after this, and that doesn't always happen. So thank you for that. How can listeners connect with you and get help on this?
Well, if you can spell Siciliano, you can just Google me. Otherwise, yeah, right. Siciliano. I'm all over the webs. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, my website, protectnowllc.com. Again, protectnowllc.com.
Fantastic. That'll be in the show notes as well. Thanks again, Robert, for coming on Escape the Clock and helping us with this.
My pleasure.
I've always been careful with my data, but look, I'm not even immune here. The conversation that you just heard with Robert, I recorded that back on March 5th of 2026. It's been about 2 months since that conversation. And since then, after 45 years of living, I've finally become a victim to a successful phishing scam. Okay, so here's what happened. My daughter wanted to sell some dolls and toys. So I did some research and I found this platform that I've never used before called Macari. And I decided, okay, I'll join that and I'll list some stuff there. Well, soon after, I started getting these emails saying that two of the items had sold. And that seemed pretty normal. I've been selling things on eBay for decades. And I looked at these emails and everything looked legit. The branding looked right. The type of information they were displaying was correct. The times were right. I would hover the links and everything was pointing to the Macari websites, things like that. It all looked completely fine. And, it looked like the kind of thing you'd expect because it was asking me to confirm how I want to receive payment for a thing that I sold. And I knew I'd have to give them that information eventually. So this actually made sense in this part of the workflow. So I was ready to give that account information out. And so I went and I clicked on the link and it took me to the site I had been on all day, the Macari site, and it started prompting me for the bank account that I wanted to use to receive the payment. I entered that information, and then something a little weird happened next. It asked me for my driver's license. Now, that's not completely inappropriate because sometimes you have to give identification for tax purposes and things like that. So I said, okay, that's probably fine. I probably wouldn't need to give that anyway. So I uploaded my driver's license information. Well, as this is happening, I noticed that the buyer is sending emails. I'm getting notifications of new emails from one of the buyers, and they're pressuring me to go faster, asking me where I am and if I'm done yet. And I'm like, well, okay, this is strange. In all the many, many years I've been selling things, I've never had a buyer pressuring me to hurry up with the confirming the purchase that I received a payment. Normally they're more interested in knowing that it's shipped. So I go and I see these multiple emails, and even one of them saying that, hey, if you're getting stuck, you can click on the support link and someone will help connect to your machine and guide you through the process. And that was it for me. As soon as I heard someone saying I should give access to my machine to someone, that triggered my full paranoia. So I opened up the Macari site in a different web browser, and what I saw completely froze me. The items that had said was sold no longer said that. I was seeing the same site, but with the actual information. So I knew I had been phished, that I had just went through a deep fake of the Macari website. So I immediately called my bank and had them cancel my card. But of course, as I'm looking at my bank and having it canceled, I can see that thousands of dollars had already been emptied out. And I just felt like so stupid for this. I'm like a complete idiot. So of course I fall for the thing that I had never fallen for before after talking with Robert and learning more about how important it is as ever to protect yourself. And look, I even knew that AI was making it easy than ever for scammers to impersonate people and entire apps. Yet here I was going, okay, I'm just doing the same old easy things I've been doing to protect myself, being kind of naive to how good this stuff is getting. Now, on the good side, I have the other things I do to protect myself are working. I always keep my credit reports frozen. So whatever information they got, including my driver's license, can't be used to create new accounts in my name. So that's good. And I reported it to the police, and I reported it to other official places. The all the appropriate things you can do, and my bank is able to, see that that's fraudulent information and get me that money reimbursed. And most importantly, I knew that whatever bank account I should use shouldn't be my big access to a lot of my financial information. It was a smaller account with less money into it, but still, that's a few $1,000s. It's not nothing. So after recording this entire podcast episode on this exact topic, I still got hit. And that's just how sophisticated these attacks have become. They're not catching the careless anymore. They're really catching everyone, even the careful. And Robert was clear that most people are failing at the 101 level basics. So I feel like if that's you or someone you really got to take action now, because if they're able to do things like this, even non-technical hackers can use AI to create something this effective. It's important to do at least some of the basic stuff, like different passwords for each of at least your critical accounts. Don't ever reuse a password. Make it a little bit harder in that way. But most importantly, the two-factor auth. It doesn't take that much time to set up two-factor authentication, especially on your email. And once you do that, you're really making it significantly harder for people. Not impossible, but harder. And that won't make you that go-to target. Things like the hardware keys, now that is really effective. Of course, if you have something like a significant amount of wealth in crypto or something, it's actually become kind of a norm to use a hardware key for that. But you can consider using that for other important data that you want to protect as well. So ultimately, separating your credentials from your bank, your brokerage, and your crypto, so that if you do have a breach, it's not going to cascade through your entire financial life, becoming some kind of crazy catastrophe. For me, it was a stressful event. I had to make some phone calls, including talking to the police. Not fun, but not a catastrophe. Robert also talked about this new attack surface, one that we really got to be careful about, which is voice and image. A predator now only needs a few seconds of audio to clone your voice. And with so many of us putting videos and things online, it's easier than ever to find this information. And AI can really analyze the tone, the way that the speech manners, the way that the person enunciates, all kinds of things, to really try to replicate it in a really effective way. It's getting better and better at this. So to the point that you might get a phone call from a family member in a panic asking you to wire money, but it's not actually a family member at all. And that's pretty scary. But Robert did recommend a pretty simple, but I can imagine quite effective tactic, which is introduce a code word or some phrase that you can prompt to them to create a barrier. That was actually one of the big action items I took from my conversation with Robert ever since I recorded this interview. And I went and spoke to my children, and I came up with fun and easy things, kind of funny things that each of them individually would know, but only each of them, so that I could do that in the case that that were to happen to me. And look, if in the case that your AI is being used to scrape your social media and to deepfake things like this, if you have someone on the other end that isn't the person you think it is, and you prompt them and they don't know what to say, it's very likely they're just going to hang up. So it can definitely be worth it, because as Robert was saying, you have to teach people how to protect themselves, and we have to teach our children how to protect themselves as well, because it's only going to get tougher. And so he came up with this, what he calls the AAA protocol, that analyze, authenticate, and act. I think that's pretty useful, especially the first part, which is pausing when something feels urgent. If I had paused and taken a moment to just go back and double check the website and the browser session I had been in without clicking the link I had clicked, that would have made all the difference for me. The Macari phishing incident that I went through. Uh, Also, recognizing that the urgency itself is a manipulation, that's definitely part of it. And you can authenticate through whatever channel is appropriate to see that you are being manipulated. Because then when you decide you do need to act, you're actually moving with your logical brain rather than your emotional one. And you're much more likely to make decisions that you won't regret. Another important thing you mentioned was the training aspect, because we need to train ourselves to do this until it becomes reflex. Because in the moment, it's likely we'll just revert to our natural tendencies, and that'll get us in trouble. Robert mentioned with his daughters, at least, that he started this when they were young, as early as like 5 years old, I think he said. That's great, because if we start talking to our children or our loved ones and make it common, we're reinforcing the behaviors in ourselves as we're teaching it. We're also making it a norm for them to think about these things. And with like a child, for instance, if we're talking about how to protect our identity and personal protection when they're young, when they get older and become more digitally connected, it'll just be a natural conversation to extend that to their online identity and presence. I think that was really good advice. And again, I could have done all of this for myself. That's on me. I screwed up. But, each one of these things is its own learning experience as well. And so I've had a lot of time to think about this kind of thing since talking to Robert. And I have a few, it's not a blueprint, but it's a few thoughts, takeaways that I think are worth considering. The first is that one of the cheapest and still most effective measures you can take is to be anonymous. Just don't put your information out there. Now, that's becoming more and more impossible. Literally everywhere you go, they're going to ask you for information now. And information is very valuable. It can be sold, it can be used, it can be trained. So it's very hard to not do this. And even Robert himself admitted that even though he said he puts nothing out there, he has to go and scrub the information out. He has reminders to go and recheck that it actually got removed and that it didn't get repropagated. It can be very tough. But if you can keep that amount of data to a minimum, then at least you're a harder target to hit. But let's be honest, being anonymous online isn't really possible. And even if you could, is probably not enough. You still need some of these other protocols. 90% of people who reuse passwords are not getting hacked because they posted their travel plans on Instagram. They're getting hacked because they're not using their two-factor auth. If someone guesses your password and you don't have that extra check protecting them into your account, then you're going to be in trouble. They not only have access, but it's likely that it's going to propagate throughout your entire system. So it's all about barriers, different passwords, two-factor authentication, passcodes, make it complicated. Just think about if you were the bad guy, what would discourage you, and try to do that to them. Because let's be honest, though, like your security is only going to be as strong as the weakest member of those who have access to your data. You could be perfect. You could be using a passwords manager and doing flawless passwords and everything. You could even have a hardware key locked in a safe somewhere. But if your spouse or parent or assistant, like Robert said, in the case where the executive was posting they were going to be traveling on an airplane, and the bad actors went for the assistant because that was the soft target. It could be a child, it could be anyone, whoever it is. That is your vulnerability, because you're still can be exposed through the people who have access to the thing we're trying to protect. Family level cybersecurity is a household responsibility. It's not just a you thing. We can take the lead in our lives and try to protect our loved ones, but we need to bring everyone in and educate each other and try to help each other out here. Because these protections, they have to extend to everyone, to have a key to all those things in our lives. And it's not just about hackers anymore either. Like the number of bad actors here are greater than ever. There is a $290 billion global industry that is legally built on collecting, packaging, and selling your personal data without your consent. This is all from market research. You'll find this in the show notes if you want to learn more about this. But that's $290 billion being made for taking and selling your data without you saying it's okay. I don't know if you're all right with that, but I certainly am not. Knowing these people are profiting from things I never intended them to use it for. The U.S. Senate Joint Economic Committee even published information that said that 4 of the major data broker breaches in recent years have cost the American consumers over $20 billion in identity theft losses. Imagine that. All that money being spent, taxpayer money, due to identity theft. $20 billion that could be spent on defense, could be spent on education, that could be spent on healthcare. Like, that's just a lot of lost money. And these criminals are not operating in the dark. Sometimes these are companies that you've heard of, or maybe you haven't heard of them, and they're profiting from data that maybe you didn't know was being collected. And because these practices have become so institutionalized, it has started to kind of feel like a norm. So I shared my experience about the car dealership that was trying to get all my private information from me. They had some hidden, very buried legalese that said what they would do with it. That made me pause. But so many times we miss that thing. There might be a free app. Well, what makes it free? They ask you for a lot of information. I was going to download an editing software, a video editor the other day, and they want my address and my phone number, email, all required fields. Now, sure, you can fake all that stuff, but who has the time to create fake emails every other minute? Like, they know that's where they're going to get their value. So we have to be aware that every one of these interactions is a leak. And the same data brokers selling to advertisers are the ones whose breaches arm the scammers. And those are the ones who eventually come for our wealth. Which brings me to the final and maybe the most important point. Wealth is not what we earn. It's what we're able to keep. So we can spend a decade building those portfolios, mastering the offensive saving and investing and compounding, all the stuff I talk about on the show. But in a single week moment on a Tuesday afternoon between answering emails, without really thinking about it, we click on the wrong link and on something that looks like a real platform, or we trust someone who wasn't who they said they were, and we pay the cost of losing potentially years or more of all that hard-earned work. So the defense matters as much as the offense. And the time to build it is before you need it. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been targeted by something sophisticated? What was the moment you realized the rules have changed? Email me at contact@escapetheclock.com or leave a comment wherever you listen. I'm Daniel C. Rogers. Thanks for listening, and best of luck hardening your defenses and escaping the clock. I'll catch you next week. That's a wrap on this episode of Escape the Clock. Everything you've heard today is for educational purposes only, designed to help you think, plan, and build a stronger financial program. Take what resonates, bring it into your Escape the Clock plan, and review it with a qualified professional before making any major moves. The book, the free planner, and the one-on-one time with me are all waiting for you at escapetheclock.com. If this episode was valuable, please leave a rating and share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll catch you next week.